IVM.
Hi, I'm Zarina Poonawalla, your peak performance coach, life coach, emotional intelligence practitioner, and NLP practitioner. I'm also the founder of Abzo Expertise Unique, and my organization constantly aims at building leaders across continents. After having worked with so many dynamic business honchos, entrepreneurs, startups, CEOs, management gurus, parents, and student communities worldwide, I am convinced that every individual has unleashed potential, and all we really need to do is realize it. Watch the magic unfold, enhance quality of life, relationships, and professions. On my show, be ready for some riveting conversations with inspirational people, snippets, stories, and much more. So here I am on this exceptional journey to find empowerment and inspiration anywhere I can. Come join me on this breathtaking path of self-realization, potential maximization, positivity, and most of all, embrace your inner power. You are on your way to empowering yourselves. Welcome to the Empowering Series with Zarina Poonawalla. On today's episode, I'm in conversation with a very promising, bright young lady, all of 17, who thinks ahead of her times and whose research on a subject which also happens to be my favorite really enticed me. Please welcome Sudiksha Miglani. Hey Sudiksha, how are you today?
Hi, I'm doing well, Zarina. How are you?
I am good, thank you. So Sudiksha, you have this amazing research. Of course, I have a little idea about it, but our listeners would love to know more. And you also love psychology. You want to pursue something in psychology. Please tell us about that.
Absolutely. So ever since I was young, I would be very interested in human behavior and the different factors which, lead to a person behaving in a certain way, right? And I also have a great love for biology, which is why I am very interested in looking at some of the biological factors which may affect our behavior, our mood, and our decisions, such as neurotransmitters, which I have written my research paper on.
Fantastic. And could you tell me the subject, the topic of your research paper?
So the topic of my research paper is the effect of neurotransmitters, which are chemicals which are released in neurons in the brain, particularly dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, and their effect on impulsive behavior in adolescents.
Fantastic. All right. And what do you think is the purpose of this research, Sudiksha?
I was very interested in looking at neurotransmitters, adolescent behavior, and the correlation between both of them. So initially, when I was coming up for, a question, we had this discussion in my school psychology classroom about impulsive behavior in adolescents, right? So impulsive behavior in adolescents and young adults almost seems to be a rite of passage, right? It's observed time and again. And there are a lot of questions surrounding it because we live in a society today where when, say, a teenager turns about 16, 17, we expect them to be developed and to be able to make certain choices which are comparable with those of an adult. However, we see that this is often not the case, and adolescents seem to give in to impulsive or risky behavior. And this made me wonder, what are certain psychological factors which may seem to be geared towards this risky behavior? And on talking with my teacher, I realized that a big misconception out there that a lot of adults have is that when a teenager turns 16 or 17, their brain is fully developed, right? So they have all the neurological pathways and which are present in an adult, which is why they will be equipped to make the choices that an adult would be able to make. And this is actually not true. There are a lot of structural differences between the neurological circuits of an adolescent and adult, which gears adolescents to almost partake in risky behavior. So the whole purpose of my research paper was to highlight these differences and make people aware of why, teenagers, while we think that they might be equipped to make well thought out decisions, this might not always be the case.
So, Diksha, you're right about the fact that, yes, adolescents and teenagers are not in the position and they're not completely equipped to be making decisions and choices. And when they do so, sometimes it is these neurotransmitters which are doing some kind of work, right? That's what you mean.
Yes, absolutely.
And we're supposed to understand that there is this biology behind the changes and the impulsive adolescent behavior that we see. Isn't that right?
Yes, absolutely.
So, do you think that this reckless behavior that teenagers have, is it not a problem but an outcome of a problem?
Absolutely. So, the way that I look at it, we often look at reckless behavior as the problem itself, right? Which is a very superficial understanding of impulses in adolescence. The way I look at it, reckless behavior is a consequence of a problem. The problem being underdeveloped neurological pathways in the brain of the adolescent, which causes them to react in a certain way. And I feel like a lot of adults and guardians who do not know this look at reckless behavior and cannot see beyond that behavior. But behavior is always an outcome of different psychological factors, some of which are beyond our control, right? So
That's right.
I think that understanding this concept can change the way that we approach impulsive behavior in adolescence and look at behavior as a consequence of a variety of factors. And
right. So what you're trying to say is that the behavior is not the problem. We're supposed to get to the root cause of the problem, and that could be your pathways, your neurotransmitters, and all the reactions or the hormonal reactions in your body.
Absolutely.
The reckless behavior is the outcome of the problem, literally.
Absolutely. Right.
That's very interesting, Sudiksha. I mean, for a 17-year-old to be able to actually understand and want to share this, I think I find that very interesting, because what I've been trying to do for many, many years is explain this to people. And it's hard. Sometimes parents don't understand this, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's because of these misconceptions and because of the fact that we have created an environment where we cannot freely talk about our impulses without shaming or making adolescents feel bad about these impulses that they have to partake in risky behavior. But if we saw that this behavior is almost unavoidable because of certain factors which are beyond their control, we would probably not see this behavior as something to be ashamed about, but something to be addressed and talked about and worked with.
Right. That's right. And you namely have, focused on these three neurotransmitters.
Yes.
That is serotonin, oxytocin, and dopamine, right?
Right.
Okay. So why don't you just enlighten us a little bit?
Absolutely.
Honestly, I think it would be lovely to know from you about, how each of these affect us and have effects on us and what they really do.
Absolutely. So, to put it simply, neurotransmitters are often referred to as the building blocks of impulses and behaviors. And neurotransmitters are chemicals which are released in the brain and the body, which affect a large variety of moods, emotions, and behaviors that we see. So the first neurotransmitter that I focused on is dopamine. And to put it simply, dopamine is referred to as the happy chemical. It's the neurotransmitter that plays a very important role in motivational component of behavior. And it impacts reward motivated behavior. So when you perform a certain task or activity that you feel is rewarding, your brain will release dopamine, and it makes you feel, it makes you enjoy that activity, and it motivates you to continue performing it. So what is interesting is that there are certain key differences in dopaminergic pathways in the adolescent brain as compared to the adult brain. So in the adolescent brain, although there are lower baseline levels of dopamine, when the dopamine is actually released in the brain while doing thrill-inducing tasks, it is far more enjoyable and far more intense. So say you have an adolescent who is driving a car over the speed limit. The dopamine released in their brain is almost addictive. And there's a high level of thrill involved when they're doing this kind of risky behavior. And it is not comparable to the dopamine released in the brain of an adult. It's not as intense in the brain of an adult, which is why an adult can rationalize it and say, maybe I'm getting a thrill out of performing this activity, but it's also dangerous and I should consider the dangers associated with this task. For adolescents, because the intensity of dopamine is much higher, perhaps they may be aware of the consequences, but the activity seems well worth the consequences because the dopamine released in the brain makes them feel happy. So, adolescents can be prone to avoiding thinking about the consequences because they're getting that rush of dopamine, which makes them feel excited.
Absolutely. Interesting. That's interesting. That's very well explained. Now, how about, let's say, serotonin?
Absolutely. So serotonin is an interesting neurotransmitter. It plays a role in regulating your mood, your appetite, your sleep. Now, there's a big stereotype that teenagers are extremely moody. They have a lot of mood swings. And we often credit this to hormonal changes, but serotonin also plays a very big role in mood swings that teenagers go through. So serotonin is important for maintaining a sense of well-being. It's the calming chemical, and it helps you manage stress and anxiety and depression. And a lot of research has shown that low serotonin levels lead to harmful and risky behaviors. It can lead to cutting, depression, eating disorders, mood swings. And the immaturity of the serotonergic system in adolescence means that they have an inconsistency in the amount of serotonin in the brain, which could explain sudden mood swings, sudden desire to partake in dangerous behaviors, and also the high levels of self-harm, right? Cutting, eating disorders are highly prevalent in adolescents, and an imbalance of serotonin can explain that. Serotonin also balances out the recklessness of dopamine. So serotonin and dopamine kind of work together in a balance. So in adolescence, whereas your dopamine is telling you to partake in a risky activity, the serotonin balances out that impulse. But if there's low serotonin levels in adolescence, there's nothing to balance out that impulse, right? So adolescents might not be able to rationalize the consequences of the behavior in their head and just follow the impulse that they are getting from that dopamine release.
So you mean serotonin release?
No, dopamine released. Okay, so dopamine and serotonin balance each other out. So when you have a release of dopamine, it kind of leads you to partake in a risky behavior again. Serotonin makes you rationalize, calmer. Correct. It's a calming chemical. And because there are low amounts of serotonin, calming chemical, in adolescence, that rush of dopamine is not balanced out by serotonin.
Right. So what adolescence is feeling at a point in time is a good rush of, let's say, your rewarding hormone, which is dopamine, but they're not able to find the balance with the calming hormone, which is your serotonin.
Absolutely. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And what about the third one, Sudiksha?
The third one has a lot to do with peer pressure and peer acceptance, which is very commonly known to cause risky behaviors, right? We talk about teenagers giving into risky behaviors when they see their peers doing it. And often a lot of adults don't understand why peer validation is so important and why teenagers will risk everything or partake in a lot of dangerous activity just to get the approval of their peers. So there's interesting research done by Jess Shatkin. He is a specialist in the field of child and adolescent psychiatry. And he wrote a book called Born to be Wild, where he talks about the role of oxytocin. And he talks about how oxytocin is at its peak in adolescence. And it serves an evolutionary purpose because that is the time where we make close bonds with our peers. And evolutionarily, it would increase our chance of survival. But in the modern day context, it is quite harmful because oxytocin, which causes us to have close bonds, also causes us in adolescence to partake in certain behaviors which are dangerous just because we see our peers doing it. And we have such a close bond with our peers that we're more likely to not rationalize the fact that this behavior is dangerous and rather think that, okay, this behavior is dangerous, but if I do this behavior, if I partake in this behavior with my peers, I will get their validation. And that matters more than the consequences of these actions. So dopamine also plays a role in peer acceptance as well, which I didn't mention earlier. So there's a lot of research which also shows that peer acceptance is a powerful stimulus for both oxytocin and dopamine, and adolescents view peer acceptance and approval in the way that adults view non-social material rewards. And that triggering of dopamine by non-social material rewards in adults is actually very high. So you can compare that to peer approval in adolescents, which can explain why it would cause them to mindlessly perform a dangerous act if they see their peers doing it or their friends doing it.
Yeah, it's also, I think, because oxytocin is, it's also called the love hormone, you know.
It is called the love hormone.
Yes. And I think it's because it has so much to do with the whole peer aspect of things, the human behavior aspect. In fact, if you see somebody doing an act of kindness, for instance, and you watch them doing such an act, like probably helping a blind person cross the street or helping a poor on the road or anything like that, you for a moment will also feel a little rush of oxytocin because you're feeling connected with that human behavior, and that's why it's called the love hormone. So it's quite interesting, and I love the way that you've connected these three with adolescent behavior, because that is so important. Because you know what I do, you are aware of that already.
Yes.
But I will tell this to everybody out there, that maximum issues and maximum troubles that we see, if you're watching a show, you watch anything around you, you see people who are disturbed or who have a disorder or a syndrome as they grow older. It all starts from childhood behavior. And that is why I completely agree with what you said about, you know, that entire bit about the reckless behavior being the outcome and not the problem. Every little trauma that a person experiences, even as they grow older or even in a later stage of their life, comes from the fact that in their adolescent years, there were some things, some decisions that they took or they were part of, like you said, you know, partaking some really risky activities and things like that, which cause you to feel a certain way, and you carry that trauma with you all your life. So this study that you've done, this research that you've done, Sudiksha, actually it addresses problems at a much deeper level. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you very much.
It's really cool.
Thank you.
You know, you've been talking about the whole peer pressure aspect and peer acceptance, right? What do you think? Why do you think actually that peer pressure has such an important role to play in the life of adolescents?
I think that at adolescence, the strongest bonds that we often make is with our peers, right? Like I said in the book written by Jess Shatkin, he also talks about the fact that in adolescence, there is this strong need to be part of something, right? In adolescence, you are building your identity. As a part of psychology, we studied social identity theory, where we develop our sense of who we are and our sense of self-esteem from the groups that we belong to. And this development of identity happens a lot at adolescence. So it's an overwhelming desire when you are building your identity to belong to a important group of people. And I think that you find that in your friends, right? So when you partake in certain behavior, which might be risky, but it's seen as cool, or you're part of, a cool group of people in your school who do certain things.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, that's the popular group. Or
absolutely, the popular group. As an adult, maybe you can rationalize that, okay, these behaviors are risky. Maybe I do not want to be part of that group. But as an adolescent, that identity in itself, or that sense of belonging to this esteemed group, is so important for your sense of self. The fact that in adolescence, we just want to feel like we are something.
We belong. We belong somewhere. We belong. And you want to please people, possibly. Absolutely. You want to please and you want to fit in.
You want to fit in. There's this overwhelming urge to fit in. Absolutely.
That's right. So that is one of the reasons. But don't you think that peer pressure also continues into young adults? It also continues later on in life, I mean, of course, you're quite young, but do you notice that around you?
I agree, but I also feel like in adolescence, when you're establishing your identity, conforming to a group matters more to you as opposed to when you're an adult and you have a established identity, an established set of beliefs and values. I feel like it's a little easier to go against the group and stand up for what you believe in, right? I may be wrong because I myself am not an adult. But
certainly. I think you're quite right, actually, because, when you grow up, you do know that this is my value system. This is what I want to believe. This is what I don't. This is what I want to be part of or not. But when you're younger, and like you mentioned, because there's anyway, let's say there's a chemical imbalance and there's a little more of this, a little less of that. And that makes you want to do a couple of things that you may later feel is wrong. But what I realize here is it's not about the adolescents. Adolescents don't really know about this. And naturally, when they're so young, it's hard to explain, right? Do you think it is possible to make adolescents aware of this research and, kind of help them reduce that possibility of their reckless or impulsive behavior?
Absolutely. I think that the change in behavior comes from self-awareness. I don't think that it's possible to change, biological factors which contribute to impulsive behavior, but I certainly think we can create an environment which guides adolescents to make better choices. We can keep them informed of why they might be prone to acting in a certain way, so they can rationalize it in their head, so that next time, if they want to partake in a risky behavior, first they'll think about, why is it that I want to do this? Am I doing this for myself? Am I doing this to get approval from other people? What are the consequences of this? I think that would definitely help in countering this behavior. Probably doing, planning ahead would prevent you from being in a situation where you need to impulsively decide. Or, I think that even parents and guardians can take a lot of steps to facilitate.
I was just about to ask you that. Don't you reckon that there is a very important role that parents and guardians play, not just to educate the adolescents around, but also to educate themselves? Because I think a lot of parents and guardians are not aware of this, Sudiksha.
Absolutely. As I was mentioning before, the fact that they're not aware of this, I think, makes them hold their adolescence to an extremely high standard, almost to the standard of an adult when it comes to being responsible, making well-informed choices, not being impulsive or giving into peer pressure. And I think that there is this culture of shaming adolescents for reckless behavior because we don't understand the factors that cause them to act in this way, because there's lack of information out there for parents and guardians as to why their adolescents are acting in this certain way. But I think if they were better informed, We could create an environment where you can talk about your impulses, right? I don't ever hear about adolescents being able to go and talk to their parents about, I have an impulse to, drive a car over the speed limit because my friends are telling me to do so, or partake in drinking because all of my peers are doing it. An adolescent who goes to their parents, most likely from the accounts that I've heard, would immediately be put down for these impulses, would be shamed, would be told that, why are you feeling like this? You shouldn't be able to, you should know better, or you should be more responsible. But if we don't talk about it, then where is the outlet for them to express what they're feeling?
True. So what do you reckon? I mean, you're a teenager, so naturally,
absolutely,
you would have a nice way of possibly giving some little suggestion, considering this entire research that you've done. Maybe 3 things you think parents can actually do. Like you said, communicate, of course, and not just dismiss their child and tell them that they're doing the wrong thing. Sometimes I think the whole parenting aspect has to go beyond do's and don'ts. What happens is, I think when you're teenagers, most times parents and you have a very interrogating conversation. Not
Absolutely.
you, I'm just saying everyone.
Right.
It's an interrogation. Have you done this? Have you done that? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Oh, you're supposed to do this. You're supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to do that. So that's interrogation.
Absolutely.
It's not a dialogue. It's not a communication. So I get that part of it, But what are the 3 top things you think as a teenager you would like for parents to be able to, in general, understand those little nuances of their adolescents growing up?
I would say, firstly, be patient with your children. Do not ridicule them if they keep making the same mistake again and again, or giving into the same temptation or bad choices, right? Because there is larger factors at play which are beyond their control, which sometimes can cause these issues. I'm not saying don't hold them accountable, but I'm saying don't make them feel excessively guilty or shame them for their mistakes. I also think that you could encourage them to release their impulses in a safe environment or in a constructive manner. So I read a lot of articles about where you can get the same dopamine rush as engaging in risky behaviors as you can while playing, a sport. You could play a group sport. It's a nice way to bond with peers and gain their validation. It's a nice way to get a dopamine rush. It's constructive. It's productive. It's in a safe environment. And it prevents them from taking out their impulses in some other dangerous situation. Right. So I think that if you were aware of this, you could guide your children to make better choices.
That's very impressive. Now I'm coming towards the last segment of this conversation on the Empowering series. But before that, I already know that you're a history buff and you're also an avid reader. So what kind of history do you like and what kind of books do you read?
I am particularly fascinated by medieval history. I have a medieval history blog that I'm currently writing about. I think the interesting thing about medieval history is exploring the different character settings. I feel like anyone who likes psychology would really like history because you get to go back through time and look at how human behaviors have progressed throughout time, right? Why did some one think differently back then and why do we think differently back today? I think that history is a very big part of understanding human behavior, particularly our identity, the way we interact with each other, our beliefs and value systems. So I think that if you are interested in psychology, I would be a little surprised if you don't like history as well, to be honest.
I love history and I completely second what you say because yes, history plays an extremely important role and medieval history all the more because, there was this ruthlessness in that era which we've seen or we've heard of or we've kind of read about, and it allows you to think about how different people had different perspectives and how much of it is carried on even today, right?
Absolutely.
Any history you would recommend?
As you know, I absolutely love English history, particularly the 14th to 16th century, the Tudor era
Tudors.
of rule,
Yes, okay.
just
Yeah.
because it is comparable to any good fantasy novel you're going to get out there. All of the drama and blood and gore
I
is,
know.
I don't think.
And two beheaded, I think.
That's right, Henry VIII,
Oh,
yes.
yes. I mean, when you talk about the Tudors, I've realized when you actually visit London, you will notice this. And I noticed this on one of my last visits, that even today, they take pride in the horrific history they have, because that's still the story they're telling when you're doing like,
Absolutely. I
dungeon or the tower, or it's pretty interesting if you actually have to think about it.
I completely admire Britain, and it's a totally different experience going and exploring their history because they capitalize off their gory, dark history in a way that I don't think
Yeah.
any other country does. And it's fascinating to see, to be honest. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing how they, take components of other cultures and then sell it back to you. I think that is quite amazing.
Yes, it is. It is. I'm just kind of trying to recollect those six wives of Henry VIII.
Oh,
Do you
Henry
remember?
VIII, yes.
Aragon, I think.
Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn,
And
Jane Seymour,
Anne of Cleves.
that's right.
Yeah.
Catherine Howard.
And
Half of them are Catherines. Very common, very
we've gone chronologically for this one.
Yes, we have.
I think people have got to know another side of Sudiksha also with her
That's right.
your love for history. And you said you have a blog, right? So what's your blog called?
It is called Medieval to Modern. It's a public blog, and I enjoy looking at history from multiple perspectives, right? Because I think that a lot of historical records that we have today, particularly of, say, individuals who didn't have a voice back then, like women. I think that women in history are portrayed as very one-dimensional. They are fit into certain boxes. And when you look at information that is not that easily accessible, you see complex personalities of these one-dimensional historical figures unfold in front of you. And as someone who's interested in psychology and behavior and personality, that's very interesting to me. So I write a lot about that on my blog. And I just explore parts of history that I think are fun to explore that may not be that well known to people because, I think that conventional history classes in our education system just seem to leave the fun parts of history out.
I think you find fun in history, so you know how to find the fun parts in history.
Yes,
the rest of it treat it like a boring subject. So I think no matter how deep we go into it, people aren't going to find that kick out of it. So you know how to do that. That's commendable, I'd say. And in fact, I'm thinking about it now from even your research angle. If you are somebody who's an avid reader or follower of history, you will realize that a lot of these people became kings at very young ages. And maybe when you think about the neurotransmitters and you think about these chemical reactions, you can connect those as well, especially with your kind of knowledge. You might be able to be like, hey, this guy really had a dopamine rush at this particular time.
Absolutely. I think an understanding of psychology helps you look beyond historical characters and really think of them realistically as people with complex emotions and factors which affected their behavior. And I think it makes history that more interesting and fun to explore.
Amazing. I just love the kind of knowledge and the kind of wisdom I'd say you have. And that brings me to asking you these last but really crucial questions of the show. So tell me, Sudiksha, a belief that you swear by.
A belief that I swear by, to be honest, is constant self-improvement. I know it might sound a little cheesy, but I think that you can, at every given moment, you can definitely be better than what you were. the previous moment, right? So I think that constant self-improvement looks at the end of the day, reflecting at your behavior and thinking, how can I be better tomorrow? How can I learn more tomorrow? How can I acquire more knowledge? How can I be a better person and make better choices? And that's something that I swear by.
That is so charming and so it's so fascinating. I am quite fascinated and spellbound with the kind of things you say. And I'm so glad you come on to the show. All right. How about, considering and keeping the research in mind, maybe you did mention what parents should probably think about, probably be more patient, have more communication, and not them, like you mentioned. How about adolescents? What are the possible things that they should think about, keeping that research that you've done in mind?
I think that adolescents should firstly not be so hard on themselves. I think that there's a lot of stress and anxiety created today because adolescents themselves put a lot of pressure on knowing what to do all the time, making the right choices, not partaking in dangerous behaviors or not having those impulses. And I think that's what creates a lot of tension and stress in adolescents today. And I would just want them to remember that there are some things which are outside your control, and there are some impulses that sometimes you cannot stop, and you shouldn't feel ashamed about them, but you should, reflect on why you feel this way and talk to someone who you trust about it instead of just keeping it in, inside yourself, all those thoughts, and letting them weigh you down and making you feel bad. Instead, you should just talk to someone and not be so hard on yourself.
That's some great piece of advice, because I think if the younger generation realizes the importance and the power of communicating, and communicating without that feeling and that fear of being judged, life can be much, I won't say simpler or harder, but it can be much more understood as they grow. So, yes,
absolutely.
Great piece of advice there. All right. And lastly, Sudiksha, what empowers you?
So, I think that what empowers me to be my best self is honestly the idea of acquiring more knowledge and information and being able to help others with my understanding of the world and of different topics, right? So that's why I think I'm very drawn to psychology as a subject, because you acquire more information about yourself and about other people, and you're able to understand other people in a way that you weren't able to before. And I think that is really important to me. So I think it's definitely being able to assist other people as well as myself and work towards improvement based on what I learn every day and the knowledge that I acquire.
Amazing. Like I said, I'm kind of spellbound and I'm kind of speechless in this conversation because I've never had such an intellectual conversation with a 17-year-old. And you are so impressive. You are so scholarly, and you're just probably as wise as a sage. So thank you for empowering us today, Sudiksha.
Oh, thank you for that.
Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It was really lovely being on the show. Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Wish you all the luck. And I'm very sure that you have a very promising, bright future right ahead of you, because you sound like an absolutely, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know what to say anymore. But yes, your wisdom is going to take you places. Keep at it. Keep shining. And all the very best to you.
Thank you.
If you liked this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Want to wish you all a happy Diwali. Hope you had a great festive season. It's been a great week in terms of the kinds of guests we've had and the kind of conversations we've had on the network this week. Do definitely check some of these things out. On This Round's on Me with Gauri Devidayal. She had a great conversation with Garima Arora, who's one of the best-known chefs in the world. It was just absolutely riveting. Do check that out. On States of Anarchy, Hamsini Hariharan spoke about chronicling India's different wars. Again, really interesting episode. Check that out. Ashton had a very interesting episode on his show, The Habit Coach. It was called I Don't Feel Like Doing Anything. It's about how to overcome malaise just generally, and I thought really, really interesting stuff. Kumi Vayana was the guest on Cyrus Says on Monday's episode last week, and she's an educator, and my God, it was such a fascinating conversation talking about the way education functions in India and some of the changes she'd like to see. Just really, really interesting stuff. Do give that a listen. On Uncle Please Sit, Anupam Manur was there with Joel and Tushar talking about the Indian economy, part 1 of a 2-part series. Second part will be out this week. You should definitely check that out. Lastly, I want to talk to you all about the Filter Coffee podcast. Karthik Nagarajan, who hosts that show, is on a little bit of a break. He's back with a banger of an episode. It is with Himura Maya, who used to run Landmark Stores, and they talk about the culture of bookstores and quizzing and all kinds of stuff. Really interesting conversation. Do check that out. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Whether you're an established sports person or a budding one, or simply a sports enthusiast, join us, Tanvi and Shlok.
We are 2 passionate pro badminton players talking policy, mindset and everything sport.
So tune in to The Millennial Athlete every Monday.
Only on the IVM Podcast Network.
Trust us, it's gonna be lit.